Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of our program. And this time we are privileged to have with us the one and only Mark Sanborn, and I'm really privileged to have this time to chat with him. And just want to give a brief introduction. Mark is a best-selling author and recognized by leadershipgurus.net as one of the top 10 leadership experts in the world. He writes an award-winning blog and is author of The Fred Factor, which has sold more than 2 million copies to date. He's established himself as an expert in turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Memphis and is featured by Crestcom in DVD-based training taught in 90 countries. His list of 2,600 clients include Harley-Davidson, Costco, Cisco, In-N-Out Burger, and now I'd just like to welcome Mark. Thank you for your time today and welcome to the program.
Well, thanks, Mike. Pleasure to be with you.
After that intro, you kind of feel exhausted and you're like, man, is this 4 people I'm talking about or me? Whew,
Stop while I'm ahead.
I know.
Thanks very much.
So I want to focus real quick on the part of the intro, ordinary into the extraordinary. I love pulling things out and diving in deep. So what do you do when you are focusing on making the ordinary into the extraordinary?
The genesis for that really was meeting Fred Shea, the real-life postal carrier who the Fred Factor is about. Mm-hmm. I lived in Wash Park for many years, and when I bought my first house there, I ran into Fred. And Fred had a job that, most of us would honestly think was pretty mundane, putting mail in a box day after day. But he made it artistry. He did so many things to add value to his work and to build relationships with the people on his route that I started speaking about him in my work and then later wrote The Fred Factor about how you can take any job and through passion, commitment, and creativity, you can add value to it and turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. And the important point to remember is it doesn't take a lot of extra effort or work. We're not talking about, working twice as hard, twice as long. We're just talking about using a little thoughtfulness and creativity to add a little extra value for what it is you do every day at work as an entrepreneur or whether you work for someone else.
Yeah, I love that, and it really is the case in the business world today. You probably have seen this so many times where it's like, how hard would it have been to just reply to my email and say, got it, I'm working on it, give me a couple days, but, or returning a phone call. So when we in the business world can do that, it really does set us apart because so many people don't. And, when you were talking about Fred, the thing that pops into my mind is he didn't have an angle for doing that. He was just trying to give value and change people's lives just for the better, for the case of, cause of mankind, not so that he can, get a whatever. Whereas in the business world, if you do it the right way, you can have a return on these extra value added items, but you want to be super careful that it doesn't come off as you doing X to get Y.
Well, you're exactly right, Mike. Fred worked in an environment where he was not incentivized. There was really no motivation to do what he did outside of the fact that he thought that was the right thing to do. Probably the most interesting thing Fred ever said to me, and I've known Fred for many years and we're still in touch and still great friends. We were talking after the book came out about all the attention that it had brought him. And he said, well, I don't understand. Doesn't everybody do their job this way? I said, well, if they did, nobody'd buy the book. But, he does it because he thinks it's the right thing to do. And I think, for anyone that's read the book or heard me tell the story, they start to get a glimpse into the fact that doing things for an ulterior motive isn't inherently wrong. But if you do something in the hopes of being recognized or paid more, you're often disappointed because you won't always be recognized or appreciated or paid more. But if you just do something because you want to, because you feel it's the right thing to do, because it's the fun thing to do, then the reward is in the doing, not in the reaction that it creates. And Fred retired, interestingly, 3 years ago. He no longer works for the Postal Service, but he still lives a life where he's always looking to be of service, whether it's to his granddaughters, who he likes to spoil, or his sons, or their wives, or his wife, Kathy. Kathy or the greater community. He's just a guy that enjoys helping people and being of service. Not everybody's wired that way. People ask me, they say, can anybody be a Fred? Well, anybody can be a Fred. Not everybody will be a Fred.
Yeah.
I can't make my kids take out the garbage. So the thought that I could make anyone be a Fred is kind of silly. I think that it resonates with people who share those same values, and they may not have ever been encouraged or rewarded for or even taught how to do it. But once they hear that story and once they learn kind of the basic principles that I talk about, 4 of them in the book, then they have the tools that they need to express that.
That you bring up a really good point where, you can try to do that and be that and teach that. But if it's not really born down inside of you that you're doing it for the right reason, it either comes off flat or not the way you wanted it. And it kind of made me think about, I play acoustic guitar, and if I handed my guitar to a virtuoso, my guitar would sound like $1 million, whereas I play it and it sounds like $100. And the point is, you bring so much, of your life experience to that and your talent. Well, when you can do these things and serve and give and give value for the right reasons, it comes off so much better than you think about the movies you see where the bellhop comes up to the room, puts your bag down, and stands there with their hand out, and you're going, okay, here's your tip. Whereas if you had just gone over and above, maybe that tip might have been way better, but now I'm just satisfying this handout.
Yes, people in that scenario, it's the difference between the obligatory tip and the tipping because you receive value. Mm. And, it's a cliche, and Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar and all the greats in speaking and business philosophy have said similar things, that if you're of greater service to others, if you produce more value, then you'll receive more for the value that you create. But you live on faith, because it isn't some kind of an ironclad guarantee, although frankly, it's about the closest thing to a guarantee that I can think of. And I see it all the time, both the good and the bad. People who spend more time arguing with you about why they can't do something than they would have spent if they had just done it.
Yeah.
I once wrote a blog called "I Can't Usually Doesn't Mean I Can't." When somebody in a service environment says they can't, more often than not, it means I don't want to, I'm unwilling to, I'm not willing to take the risk, I don't know how. It doesn't mean they're incapable. It doesn't mean that they're blocked or prevented by someone or something. It just means that to do it would be so much harder than to stonewall you and say they can't.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I've heard this in sales kind of training before, and it might apply to that scenario where someone says, I can't, and then maybe the manager comes along, the customer service manager would say, well, if you could, what would that look like? And maybe that kind of opens up their mind to go, well, I don't know, I guess if I could do it, then I would be doing and feeling and delivering. And so I think it really is, you just get stuck in your ruts, and that's just huge. And it all gets back down to giving and serving. And our good friend Bob Berg talks about that in The Go-Giver. And that's such a monstrous mindset, because it really is a mindset, because it's not a, you put in X and you get out Y. And I think it's really interesting. I read that you had made this statement, and I just love it. As a result of my life, work, and relationships, I would hope my headstone someday reads, while alive, he lived. While he lived, he loved. Because he loved, he served. And when he served, he led. How did that kind of flow and philosophy come about to kind of connect all of those dots there?
It probably was the result of just, as you get older, you start to think a little more deeply about your life. When you're young, you think your runway is infinite, and then you get to a certain age and you start to see the end of the runway way off in the distance, and you hope it's still a far way off, but, who knows? It's really about trying to understand how it all fits together. I mean, there's so many different ways to live your life, and you have the freedom to choose, and that's both an awesome freedom and a terrible responsibility, because if you choose poorly, you can get to the end of your life and say, wow, I blew it. I didn't have the relationships I could have, or I didn't achieve what I wanted to, or I don't have the freedom to enjoy the balance of my life that I'd hoped to have. And I think that, first of all, life, Irenaeus said, a man or a woman fully alive is the joy of God, and I paraphrase that. But basically, many of us are sleepwalking through life. I, in retrospect, always regret when I look back at the day and I go, wow, there were a couple hours I really just frittered away And I sometimes, frittering hours away actually is the right thing to do, but it's when you do it unconsciously. It's when you're not focused. It's when you don't choose to just say, I'm going to take a couple hours and kick back. And when you don't live with intentionality that you're not fully alive. And then if you're alive, it's about how well and what you love, the people you love, the things you love doing, how much, for that matter, you love your life. And leadership is ultimately, to me, and I've spent 31 years teaching leaders how to lead or lead better, it's about being of greater service. I'll say ambition is a wonderful thing. I'm a capitalist. I have nothing against ambition. I always tell my clients, as long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But I always warn them not to confuse ambition with leadership. Ambition benefits you. Ambition benefits the ambitious. Leadership always benefits the greater good. We know someone is a leader because of how they made us feel, or how they changed the organization, or how they impacted the community. And so I think a lot of times people think that, leadership, and certainly you can be a sales leader in the sense of I'm number one in the company, nobody's better. But if you're not helping others become better, if you're not being of greater service to your clients, then you're really a sales front runner, not a true sales leader.
Yeah, and in hopes of not butchering another quote, I remember one from Maya Angelou that says something to the effect of, people might forget what you say, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. And so in your example there, a leader could be just that leader in the position of leadership, but they're just, barking out orders and striving to get numbers, whereas if you're giving and serving and, speaking into the lives of the people you lead and leading by example, now all of a sudden they're not going to forget how you made them feel, because now they want to follow you. They get behind that vision and they get that fire.
Well, I wrote a book called You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader, and in the book I say that, a title can confirm leadership, but it can't bestow it. Somebody gives you a title and make you a leader. I can call you a mouse, and you can live in a cookie jar, but that doesn't make you a mouse. It's about what we do. And when I wrote the book, really at the front of my mind was, I think most people know, because if you've been in the workplace very long, you've worked for a quote-unquote manager who fancied themselves a leader but wasn't. They did not have leadership abilities. And likewise, we often see there are people that don't have any title or any position on the org chart that exert a powerful influence over the organization. And I want people to know that just because you don't have a title, for heaven's sakes, don't let that prevent you from leading, from making things better for others. I call it little L leadership in the book, just to kind of differentiate. Big L leaders are the people that are charged with the management of others. But little L leaders are anybody in the organization, like Fred the postman. He was not a manager at the United States Postal Service. He had a route. He walked the route and delivered mail. And yet I would argue that he was one of the most powerful leaders the USPS had.
Yeah, I think that's huge, and I'm in the world of marketing, and so many people think, well, I'm not in marketing. Yeah, but you might be if you just do some marketing type things in your organization, such as returning a phone call on time and being kind to people, because sometimes the best marketing is a good feel all the way through the customer journey. So you mentioned your book, You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader. Thinking about some of your other books, like The Fred Factor and, Sanborn Associates and Team Built and Up, Down, or Sideways, do you feel like there could be maybe a common thread that runs through each one of those books that might even connect them all into like a one grand lesson?
Well, I think there is, and it kind of became apparent halfway through the journey. In the last 12 years, I've written 5 books. I just completed another book that'll come out next year. And I guess it was probably around book 2 or 3, somebody else pointed it out to me. But even though the books were on different subjects, leadership and service and extraordinary performance and the rest, team building, the underlying theme is that nobody can prevent you from choosing to be extraordinary. And that's so simple that you go, oh, yeah, well, right, heard it. I don't know. I'd not really thought about it that way before. I think many people think extraordinary is thrust upon us or taught us or we have to do it or we're rewarded to do it. But many of the people that I've met in my work, in my travels, that are really extraordinary, had to overcome incredible negativity and terrible circumstances and setbacks and challenges, and disabilities. And I don't have any hard data that would prove this, but I often think that the people who have it the easiest often are the least extraordinary because they've never been challenged to dig deep and really perform at higher levels. Fred the Postman's a great example. You might think after reading the book or hearing his story that he was the beneficiary of really good parenting, but he wasn't. With his permission, I share that his parents were very self-absorbed and petty, and he really became who he is as a reaction against that, as he did because of an example. In other words, he didn't say, wow, I want to be like my parents. He said, I don't want to ever be that way. And that's what set him on the track to become the great person that he is today.
Yeah, that makes me think of something that we've all known for a lot of years, but I literally just saw this morning before we started our interview. And you mentioned about the people that sometimes have had it so easy they don't appreciate, or they don't have that foundation. And it's like the story of the pearl. How does a pearl get formed? Well, it gets formed from some irritation and that little grain of sand, and it's that irritation, and then it just gets better and better, and then even kind of like the diamond. That's formed from intense pressure, intense heat. Well, good things come from that irritation and come from that intense pressure and intense heat. And if you can come through it, you might come out to be that pearl or that diamond in your whatever, your business, your personal, your finances, things like that.
You're exactly right. And nobody volunteers for that stuff. I mean, I don't get up in the morning and consciously say, wow, I really hope I'm hit with an incredible setback today. But the reality is they come, it's part of the human process. And when they come, one of the hardest lessons in life is twofold. One, General Mattis, the United States Marine Corps, who was just appointed as the Secretary of Defense in the upcoming Trump administration. He is a great reader of books, and he was a big fan of the Stoics, and he always carried with him the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And he was asked why he always kept that book with him. It was kind of a personal Bible. And he said it reminded him that no matter what circumstances he faced, he realized that he wasn't alone. He was not exempt. Everyone faces those kinds of difficulties. And so, number one, we need to realize it's going to happen. And then number two, since we, to the degree we can't avoid what we encounter, we do then choose how we respond. And sometimes on a good day, we respond as victors of circumstance. And sometimes on a bad day, we respond as victims of circumstance. And we miss the lesson, and we pity ourselves, and we think we're the only person in the world that got a ticket or audited by the IRS, or that we are the parents of the only kid in the world failing math. And it's just not the case.
Yeah, and it just gets into that myopic view, because you're looking at you and yourself and pity me, but then when you can come out and look at the 30,000-foot view and look at maybe where you've come from, the good things, and maybe even some of the things you've worked yourself through, or some other people that have it worse off than you. It really is that perspective, and too many times we need to take off those glasses. That's a really huge point. So over the years, have you noticed any maybe common misconceptions, or when people read your book or come to your talks, where maybe they communicate back to you later that boy, I sure picked up this from your book or your talk, and you're thinking in your mind, well, that's not the point I was making at all. And so is there anything that, maybe a misconception that people get that maybe they should be thinking about it another way?
One of the things that I've encountered from time to time is somebody says, I used to be a Fred and people took advantage of me. Those are two different things. Trying to be of greater service and being bullied or tricked or manipulated into doing what people want you to do. Those are two different items. And certainly I can see how if you want to please others, you can be manipulated. But that's not what the Fred factor is about. Fred has very healthy self-esteem. He has very strong boundaries. He was never bullied or tricked or manipulated into doing anything he did. It was a choice he made, and B, it was a choice that he didn't regret. So I always like to tell people, don't confuse pleasing others at all costs with being a Fred. They're two very different things. The other thing we've really already covered, but it's worth repeating, and that is this isn't about being a member of the Lucky Birth Club. This is about, regardless of your age and what your past looks like, this is about choosing to be extraordinary today. And it might be in the face of huge odds. It might not be that hard to choose to be extraordinary, but there's no abdication. You ultimately are responsible. I can encourage you. I can write books about how to do it. Your friends can support you. Your parents can love you, but you still make that choice of whether you just go through the day with the least amount of energy and effort, or you choose to take the ordinary events of the day and add a little extra to truly make them extraordinary.
Yeah, that's like you said, we can talk and write in volumes on that one point alone, so it definitely bears repeating. So last question, what are you reading now? What are your favorite books that you're into?
Well, I've started reading a lot of fiction, but good fiction. There's a lot of research that says fiction makes us more empathic and teaches us often as much as nonfiction. One book of nonfiction I'm just browsing through is Tim Ferriss's new book, Tools of Titans, which is pretty interesting because it's kind of a distillation of some of the best ideas from his podcast, which I believe is the #1 business podcast in the world today.
Yeah.
And then I'm reading a couple books of nonfiction. I just started a book by Stephanie Meyer, and I was not into vampires, but she wrote the Twilight series. She now has kind of an espionage kind of thriller called The Chemist, and I'm just starting that book. So I try to read. I probably spend as much time picking books to read as I do reading books because I refuse to waste. I don't buy a book and say, well, I'm not obligated to spend 8 or 12 or 14 hours of my life. If I get 50 pages in and it sucks, man, I abandon it because life's too short to read bad books.
That's awesome. And yeah, that is a really good point that, you can be on vacation and have just a stellar business idea because kind of you're relaxed and your mind is, off of, the stress of the day. Whereas in books, you don't have to be reading that high level leadership or sales or marketing book. Sometimes you can pick up those lessons and see those threads throughout anything you're doing. It's just that awareness. So I think that's really huge. So Mark, thank you so much for your time. It's been a wonderful pleasure to have you on. What's the best way that people can come and learn more about your books and your programs? Is it your website, marksanborn.com?
It is, MARKSANBORN, the fewest letters possible. All the links to my blogs and free resources and books there at marksanborn.com. So, Mike, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for doing all you're doing and keep up the wonderful work. Thank you for making an impact, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, Mark.
You too. All the best.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.